Religion and faith are a key social activity, despite denomination and choice of faith practice. Religious institutions play diverse roles in the weave of the social fabric, which include the following: the development of good morals, conscience, and a positive influence on ethical societal behavior, the provision of social relief in outreach programs, such as bursaries, educational support, feeding schemes, and clothing donations. Some offer full-time and partial employment, training, and skills development. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an extremely significant impact on the functioning of society, as well as many sectors of economic life. Religious institutions, however diverse, can to some extent be classified as key role players in social work and the social development industry. The pandemic has severely affected and disorganized religious institutions. In our community conversation, we have with us Pastor P Tlhabanyane, Senior Pastor and Founder at Bethesda Kingdom Ministries in Mahikeng, a social activist, a community builder, and a marriage counselor.
Let me first of all start off with greeting all the viewers and those who will be listening to these comments and inputs that I'll be making in the midst of this very challenging period that we are going through. Clearly, there's not one miracle bullet that will come with a one-time solution to the multiple problems and challenges we are faced with. But then allow me from the religious sector to bring my contribution in the pool of many other probably available ideas from the various experiences that various church institutions, denominations, and religious leaders have. You should bear in mind that COVID-19 is a global pandemic, and so every part of the globe will respond differently to the challenge as it is. It's a national, challenge as I'm talking to you from South Africa. And as a heterogeneous society made up of various forms of people or nations or communities, tribes, and races, the response would always be different. If I were to talk about the religious sector, the manner in which this pandemic has affected the religious sector, as we all know, religious sector survive from contributions, and contributions which are not, so to say, mandatory, in a way that if they're not flowing, there could be summons issued to those who are not paying in their dues. So if you have to have a situation like your lockdown level 5, a situation where there's absolutely no meeting at all, that has a negative impact on cash flow to the church. And you talk about churches that they rely on funding international donors. You talk about churches that they rely on local donors. One of the organizations I serve in, has the audit finding or audit opinion that says expenses need to be cut down because there's a global economic crisis, and COVID-19 in its way exacerbates the situation. Applying myself to the question of whether governments should fund churches, as we see in other parts of the world, as we see in other parts of the countries, the reality is people who serve in churches, people who lead in churches in the form of religious leaders, in the form of church workers, they have their own commitments. So even if there's no cash flow coming into the church, these people have their own commitments. Some of them are husbands, some of them are mothers, some of them are breadwinners, some of them are taking care of some of their family members. So yes, the reality is when your normal supporters of the church in the form of members or partners cannot continue to pay their dues, you have a situation arising where the solution of personal problems might be creating a problem in another side. Now the question is, will it be prudent for churches to look at governments to do that? outrightly I say yes, that would be with a proviso to that also. Because the moment someone else pays your bills, then they determine your agenda and they determine then your program. So the reality is, much as religious organizations need funding from government, the question is, will government fund any institution without attaching strings to it? Even without strings, I say government should support religious institutions on one basis: the function that churches play. If you were to think of the psychosocial support that churches give to members of the society, members of the community, if you think of bereavement counseling, throughout COVID-19, our experience has been, we've been inundated with deaths. I mean, let alone the fact that many churches have lost religious leaders. You have a situation where you cannot stop going to bury the dead. You cannot withhold your services as a religious leader. Even if your members are not meeting, you need to go out there. Actually, what has become an experience during COVID-19 is that you've got to go beyond burying the so-called members of your church only, but be focused on people, because people will die, people will lose their lives, other religious leaders will be overstretched, they will need support from others. So those people who have lost their loved ones, they need support. They need an emotional support. They need counseling. They need bereavement counseling. There's somebody who must bring closure to them. I mean, the reality is there are husbands who survived COVID-19 who were not there at the burial of their wives. There are women, there are wives who survived COVID-19 who were in isolation when their husbands were buried. There are children who did not attend their parents' funerals. There are family members who did not visit their loved ones when they were going through this harshest and the hardest time. So these people still linger. There's still that feeling lingering around them of pain. There's that feeling lingering around them of bereavement, and also the fact that I did not do enough to give them joy, to give them happiness in the last moments they were going through. But then again, what makes it even worse is that some of them were not there. I mean, you've got to appreciate that with COVID-19, some families have been closed, as in the father, the mother, and the kids, or part of the children died. So you've got that situation. And how do you do that? How do you counsel that in the midst of scientists who are sharing the figures, in the midst of scientists who are predicting in terms of their wisdom and their knowledge and their behavior and their studies of the behavior pattern of pandemics such as this one, or viruses of this nature? They can already predict what is likely to happen, what is likely to come. Now, who sits there to comfort the people and encourage them? Who sits there? Who is there to give people this emotional and psychological support? Religious leaders do that. And for that reason, I'm saying, even without attaching strings, even without influencing or dictating to what churches can say or not say, support or not support, it is a prudent thing for governments around the world to support religious institutions as partners in running governments and leading nations. So if you look at the youth development, the religious leaders and the churches are involved in youth development. If you look at skilling, you would call it whatever program you'd call it. I mean, exposing young people to skills even before your conventional job. You have such situations at churches. I mean, you've got ushers in church that you teach courtesy. You've got conferences where you cook, where you teach young people culinary. You've got areas where you've got to secure the vehicles and those who come to churches, where you conscientize young people of security and unemployed people. You've got the aged that are taken care of, and you involve the young people. You involve other people to look at others. So you've got this fabric of society that the church is silently and quietly, religiously, and with utmost commitment continuing to serve. So there's a lot, so to say, despite the ongoing changes, despite the ongoing challenges that the church continues to perform. I would spend the whole year explaining the role. Once you talk about society, you cannot rule out a church. The problem with the majority of us, we look at as a church as a religious, spiritual institution only, as not touching with the essence, the core of a human being the spirit of every person. And the moment we look beyond the literatures read, whether I agree with the Quran or I disagree with the holy books of the Bible, or I agree with the holy books of whatever other religion, if you look beyond that and look at the function that this religious institution play in society, you will appreciate that there is an unavoidable synergy that must be found between what the government does and what the church is doing. From one side and from another side, they can both flow together and serve and build a better society. So I am saying it would be a prudent idea to say government should support religious institutions. As we also know quite well now, some of the religious facilities of churches are used to distribute medication. Some of the religious structures that were built even without support of government. I mean, some of the churches bought the site like any other person would buy. They bought building material like any other person would do. But would also make the facilities freely available to be able to be of assistance to extend the service that government is giving, whatever service that might be. So I'm in support of that. What the religious leaders and the church should guard against is now where government seeks to dictate the program and speak to the agenda of the church because of the support. If it is a support, there is no strings attached to it. It's a blessing. It's a good thing. And I think this will go a long way, helping us to understand the dilemma, the quagmire we find ourselves in. Yeah, I think we find ourselves in a situation where we had to adapt to change. I wish I could say forcibly adapt to change, not forced by anyone, but the circumstances that kept on, arising and confronting us. The reality is, at the beginning of COVID-19 discovery in the Republic of South Africa, there were negative connotations around that. As if it was a church spreading it, it was the church, distributing it. But I think we need to be grateful to God for a church, because if it was not for a church meeting, we would have discovered very late as a country that we had COVID in this country. I mean, it was friends who visited a fellow friend in the country, went back to their own countries, only to be detected there. You must bear in mind, these people came into our country, they left our country without being detected. Only when they went back to their countries were they detected to be COVID-19 positive. And they relayed the message back to their friends back in South Africa. And thanks God to this religious leader who was so bold to speak out. And you find the same situation with your patient 31 of South Korea. The church has definitely been very instrumental. And the reality is, we had to maneuver our way through that negative reporting about the church to be able to say, look, anybody can say what they like about the church, but if it was not for a church, we would not have known the situation, because other meetings were taking place, other meetings were going on formally, and planes were landing and planes were going out. But the blessing became out of this plane that carried people that came out of the church. We therefore had to adapt to the new change. Imagine a situation where you had to understand that I've got my members out there who are losing brothers, who are losing close relations, who are losing colleagues. I've got members out there who are sick and are in isolation. I mean, you had to sit in your own house as a religious leader and feel the pressure of not being able to go out until you felt like this is self-imprisonment. You've had to come to a point where you feel like a lockdown is like self-imprisonment. I am not forced to be in this prison, but I'm imprisoned, not because I've done anything wrong, but for the good of my family and my nation. Now you had to take that out from your house to the rest of your congregation out there. I mean, you've had to think about old women who were living alone, pensioners who were all by themselves. You've had to think of your congregants who were in the far-flung areas of the city where there was no transport, where they could not travel for groceries. You had to start creating ways and means of saying, how do they continue to have some food to eat out there? Because even if they have money, they cannot travel to the shops because where they are living, it is not easy to travel. So you had to think of those things. In the final analysis, you had to come as a religious leader to say, what is happening to the spiritual being of these people? How do I continue reaching these people? How do I continue getting through to these people? Leadership, it's all about finding solution at every level of a problem. Leadership, it's all about being creative. If you are a leader and you can't be creative, you will not take your people anywhere. It is for that reason we started meeting virtually with BKM leadership. We started meeting virtually with our friends around the country and say, what is that which we can do? And we found out that let us reach those who are connected. Those who are connected reach others by whatever means. The majority at that time did not have data. Some did not even have Zoom. So you had to connect with the people, assist them to connect on Zoom so that they get through the message. You had to find ways now of linking your Zoom to your Facebook. And there's no time to go to an outlet. You've got to do everything online. You've had to do everything online. Find ways of buying software, using the gadget that you have, the cell phone that you have, to say, I do not have big, TV cameras. I cannot provide good quality picture. But what is important, it's not a good quality picture. It is the message reaching out to the people. Let me tell you, the best withheld from you is worse than the least that can be released to you. In simple terms, anyone who has a best picture to give but does not bring you a good message is far outclassed or surpassed by someone who would come to you with a poor sound quality, poor picture, but relay a message to you. And that's what we ended up having to do. Now, what we do in BKM, after some time of preaching, I would also rest my voice and get others to preach. The reality is that after lockdown in November, I've had to go for vocal cords operation because they had been put under tremendous strain. I mean, having to conduct meetings with my leadership, talk to friends, conduct marriage seminars, because one other problem, we realized that the majority of married people have vowed to be together till death do part them, but not to be around each other until that time. So it became another problem to say, look, it was emotionally building pressure that I have vowed to be with this person, but I'm used to be 8 hours away doing something else. I'm used to being 8 hours away from this just to get that relief. And we saw that, we had it in the news, women abuse, child abuse cases, and so forth. And we thought that there's nothing demonic or evil about anything. It is the prevailing situation. And that's how we said we are going online. From the onset, it was not that well understood. From the onset, it met with negative, what you calls and the like. But we were convinced as BKM leadership that, look, whatever we can do to reach out to the people, we would do. And it was interesting when we got feedback to realize that we are encouraging far beyond BKM members, far beyond doctrinal issues, far beyond theological traditional issues, because you now had to come and preach and talk to people, bearing in mind that it is not my church only that is listening to me. it is not only believers who subscribe with what I say, how I say it, without compromising the quality of the gospel. So there had to be a lot of adjustment. I mean, I've had to meet confrontations and accusations because my nephew had to assist with technical, my daughter had to assist with this, my wife had to assist with program directing, and I had to preach. Some people said, you now have made this church a family church. But I knew quite well that, I've got a well-able team there, but they are under lockdown. I cannot say to them, break the rule, because as a leader, you've got to learn to obey other people's leadership so that your leadership is obeyed. It is for that reason when Jesus healed the people, he never stopped them from taking medication because he did not prescribe the medication. Whenever he met sick people, he would pray for them, heal them. But this is what he said, go back and show yourself to the priests. Why? At that time, it was the prerogative of the priests to be able to say to the sick, you are now sick. Moving forward, how do we go forward? Because we've got to go as one nation. We've got to go as one community. I would say we've got one message to carry along as we move forward, is that we've got a common problem. So we must develop a common solution. It would be very foolish of anyone to make any mileage personally or selfishly out of this situation. Was the moment anyone has any reason to suspect that there are ulterior motives to what you do, people will pull back. And when they pull back, that is how you weaken the force that we so badly need to fight this challenge that we have. All what I can say is that regardless of how strong or weak your faith is, regardless of what kind of a doctrine you follow, the simple thing is, if we do not wash hands, if we do not sanitize, if we do not wear masks, if we do not distance socially, if we do not avoid unnecessary gatherings, we will all suffer bad consequences. Just before December, we were informed that we were about to be hit by the second wave. And whether you believed it or not, whether you defied or not, the second wave did come. All what you need to do when the weatherman or the weatherwoman is reading the news and is saying the temperatures will be down from beginning this day, coming the seventh day from today. All what you need to do if you want to survive cough, if you want to survive flu, is that you must adapt. You must change your mind. Don't fight a person who's trying to advise you. So we are now hearing of a possible third wave. What does this mean? It means we must all think of ways to mitigate against this one. We cannot afford to go to the levels of 20,000 infections. We cannot afford to go back to the levels of thousands and thousands of losses of life, new infections. All what we can ask for from the good Lord is that may the recovery rate continue to rise. May the new infection rate continue to decline. May the death associated to COVID-19 continue to decline. May the figures of those who are living with this pandemic continue to decline. And it cannot just be wishful thinking by speaking, addressing meetings. Every one of us must play a role in it. Recently, I was talking to leadership to say, look, we have got a problem that affects all of us. What is that message we can carry through to the broader society to mitigate against the possible outbreak of a third wave? And the simplest thing is, let's go and talk to our communities. Let everybody talk to someone just to behave responsibly, to do what is right. Let me tell you, COVID-19 is beatable. It can be beaten. And my simplest lesson to beat it is with the health sector, who work in hospitals, who work in clinics. There are some who have not been infected to date. There are some who have survived it to date. And how do they do it? They obey and abide by the protocols. So that's all. Let's do it. We have funerals Let's abide by the protocols. Don't think there's anyone who hates you so much that they don't want you to bury your dead decently and respectfully. All what everybody, including the president and the health authorities, are saying is that whilst we lose others, can we save others? Whilst you have lost your loved ones, we cannot afford to lose you too. So let's comply. Let's read the lessons. Let's follow the lessons and let everybody speak to another person. Let me tell you, for as long as the president speaks alone nationally, the message may not filter to far-flung areas like your Moshawane, like your Koikoi, like your Tsidila Molomo, like your Lohacheng Ding Lohachane. Those are the people that may not be able to be reached by the message of the president. At times, even if they listen to the message, they may not follow the language because they are more conversant with vernacular. So somebody who can relay the message from English to Setswana, to Sizulu, to Xhosa, Sishangane, Sindebele, Sivenda, you name it. Somebody must be able to do that so that all of us understand the message correctly. Because it is only when we understand the message correctly that we will be able to respond appropriately. We will only respond appropriately to the safety of everyone. One person who has not gotten the message clear may pose a danger to the rest who have got it very clear. So you've got a responsibility to share the message with someone as we move forward. I know you are religious, I know you are political, I know you are in business, I know you are wherever, but cross the boundary line and behave like a member of the broader nation. Thank you very much. God bless.